So indeed, we in NV have for the last 2 years tried to analyze the consequences of this winter package to see how it will, what kind of consequences it will have for the Norwegian energy system. But today, to help us to create a common understanding of how the EU energy policy influenced the Norwegian energy sector and also help us to understand the recent changes in the European regulation, we have invited Mr. Megan Richards. She is Director of Energy Policy in DG Energy of the European Commission. You have such a remarkable CV, so I will not try to repeat that one here, but we are very, very pleased that you are taking the tour over to Norway and that you want to share your insights with us today on the regulation and also where perhaps the regulation is heading. So thank you. You are welcome. The floor is yours.
So good morning, everyone. It's an absolute delight to be here. I was just mentioning this morning that I think it's about 15 years since I was last in Oslo. Terrible to admit that, but it has changed so much and it's really very dynamic, and you can see so well how the energy of the Norwegians has been transposed in the city, and of course how you have been using very well your oil and gas reserves to the very best of your citizens. I also had the opportunity this morning to see a really fascinating recycling plant, really very innovative, showing how the circular economy can work very well. And 1/3 of the waste that is being recycled in that plant is actually coming from the UK, which for the moment is still an EU member state. So I see we're also in well-coordinated EU-Norwegian colors. We're all wearing black and white, so and we all have women, very good gender balance. I should expect nothing less from Norway. So thank you very much for inviting me. You know, Norway and the European Union, of course, have a very important cooperation, especially in the energy sector, because, of course, as a member of the European Economic Area, Norway adopts and brings into its local laws the vast majority of our EU legislation. And this is particularly important. So it's really very useful for us to be here, and energy, of course, is one of the most important elements for us on the EU-Norway agenda. So I want to talk about 3 aspects here. I'll try not to be too long, although they told me to speak for 20 minutes. If you get bored, you wave in the back and I will stop. But I wanted to talk, first of all, of course, about the strategic importance of the EU energy partnership and our cooperation with Norway, which is absolutely essential from a security of supply point of view, but also because we have very many similar issues and principles and concerns in the energy sector. Second, where the European Union is in terms of the clean energy transition and what you call the winter package, we call the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, not EU citizens, for all Europeans, we call it, and the implications, of course, for EEA. And third, what we're doing in terms of preparing our long-term strategy for greenhouse gas emission reduction. This is one of our obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement, and we're expecting to come forward at the end of this year with a proposal before the Katowice COP24 meeting. So, on the first point, Norway as a key EU energy partner. As I mentioned, Norway is, of course, one of the cornerstones of our security of supply. We get about 40% of our gas from Norway, and you very kindly and generously export all your gas, a large part of which comes to the European Union. And it's clear that gas is going to have, particularly in the short term, a very important and continuing role in the clean energy transition to make sure that, particularly with respect to the variability of renewables, which we're trying to increase, we can offset a bit by gas. We will have power to gas, etc. So, as you know, gas is a particularly important element there. Norway has been a steady and reliable partner of the European Union as a significant supplier of gas and oil, as I mentioned, and it is Europe's second largest supplier of gas. In 2017, Norwegian gas production rose to the highest level in 50 years, to 124 billion cubic meters. And in 2017, as I said, virtually all Norwegian gas production was exported to the European Union. But our relations go far beyond the consumer and supplier relationship. We have, of course, this very important role of Norway as probably the most significant partner in the European Economic Area. We have this common legislative framework, and this is particularly important in the context of the legislative actions that I'm going to mention in the context of the Clean Energy for All Europeans. We have shared objectives for achieving sustainable development, and Norway's role in meeting our climate obligations under Paris is really very important, and we count very much on you. A lot has been done already in Norway. We're very impressed, even in the oil and gas sector, with the changes that you have been making in terms of improving the sustainability of that sector, which, as you know, is perhaps not the best in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions, but you are really doing a lot in that section. And I understand that in September this year, 50% of new vehicles that were sold in Norway were e-vehicles, which is, again, the most important element compared to the rest of your European neighbors. You are doing much better on that side than many of our other member states. We have a common interest and support for the promotion of research, innovation, and technology, and, of course, for low-carbon technology such as carbon capture and storage. And the project that I saw this morning on waste incineration is also intended to develop better carbon capture and storage procedures. And Norway has been an extremely active and very reliable partner in our research programs over many, many years. As an associated partner and very active participant, we rely very much on your continued contribution and active participation in our research and innovation programs, and vice versa. We support the highest possible use of renewables in our energy systems in Europe. Hard to improve on the Norwegian electricity composition. I think you're at 98% renewables in the electricity mix, of which 96% I think is hydro and about 2% wind. We have a big challenge in Europe to try to increase the renewables in our energy mix, but we're making progress. We can learn from the Norwegian example, but not all our countries have the same advantage of the natural resources that you have here. And of course, we have a very important, resilient and interconnected energy network. Several high voltage electricity lines connect Norway to the European Union. 2 additional lines, the North Link and the North Sea Link, are due for completion by 2020 and 2021. And a 3rd interconnection, the North Connect to Scotland, is under discussion. Well, we hope still that Scotland will be part of the EU, but let's see what happens over this weekend and going on. There's also, of course, an oil pipeline network in the North Sea, and 5 major gas pipelines connect Norway to EU member states. And this established infrastructure ensures the continuity of our energy relations so long as product continues to flow. The Economist magazine has said that pipelines are like marriages, but even more binding. So we hope that we continue to have this good relationship with you. The second point I wanted to cover is, of course, where we are on what you call the winter package. Some people in Europe also call it the winter package. The clean energy transition, and of course the legislative acts that we have proposed in the Clean Energy for All Europeans package. This is particularly timely to speak about this now. You have seen, many of you, the IPCC report, which came out about 10 days ago. The report is very dramatic. It's what we all knew, but we really have to make even more efforts now to move forward in this area. It's clear that clean energy is something we all have to strive for. We have to make rapid progress. We have to do as much as we possibly can. To a certain extent, I think that the legislative acts proposed in the Clean Energy Package have done a very good job. In fact, the Commission's proposals have been increased in terms of the renewables target for 2030 and for the energy efficiency target for 2030 by the European Parliament and Council. So the agreement that we have there is even more ambitious than our initial proposal, which is a very good thing. We want to make the energy market in Europe, and of course this involves Norway too, even more robust, even more amenable and adaptable to the integration of renewables. We want to make sure it's sustainable. We want to make sure that the interconnections between our countries work better. And this part of the 4 legislative acts in the market design part of the package are particularly important also for you, and we hope that we will work quickly together on that. There are also 3 initiatives in the clean energy package which are not legislative, which I want to mention briefly. One is an initiative to improve clean energy on European islands, of which we have over 2,000 inhabited islands in Europe, most of which have geographic or access problems to clean energy, but many of them have domestic and local potential either in wind, solar, geothermal, etc. So we're trying to encourage those islands to work better. We have a huge problem with energy poverty. One of the European member states has almost a 50% energy poverty problem. In other words, almost 50% of the households in that country cannot afford to run their electric appliances, something that in Norway would be astounding, I'm sure, or to provide heating or cooling in the summer. So this is something that we are working on as well. And then, and perhaps an even more important one in the context of the clean energy transition, is the coal regions in transition. We still have almost 250,000 jobs in the coal sector in the European Union, of which the vast majority are in mining. And we want to encourage those countries, many of which have agreed to move away from coal. We want to encourage that transition to come even faster, to ensure that energy efficiency provisions are introduced as quickly as possible in those areas, and also to the extent commercially viable clean carbon capture and storage for them, as well as ensuring that these populations and their families are addressed and find solutions to other jobs and retooling and resourcing their activities. So you've mentioned already the climate change, the issues that we are being affected by in our daily lives. And so, of course, we are making a lot of progress on these clean energy legislative acts, which are designed to address and reach many of our Paris Climate Agreement goals. So the Renewable Energy Directive now has a binding renewable energy target for the European Union of at least 32% by 2030. And this is different from the old 2020 targets, which were individual member states. Now it's at EU level we have to meet those goals. And there is an upwards revision clause as well in the directive that will be looked at in 2023. And this will contribute to the Commission's political priority to become a world leader in renewables, to support renewable energy industries in Europe, and to, of course, contribute to the decarbonization, particularly of the electricity sector, but also of others. The updated Energy Efficiency Directive also has now a target of at least 32.5% energy efficiency improvements by 2030, again with an upward revision clause by 2023. And the new directive on energy performance of buildings, which already came into effect in July this year, is also making progress, I think, in improving energy efficiency, an area which is of particular importance in the coal, of course, but gas and oil sector, where we can really make improvements. And I know in Norway you have also done a lot in this context. Another thing that is very important for us is the new governance regulation. Where's Siri? There you are. One of your colleagues has even worked on this and participated till 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning even, on the discussions of the trilogue to finalize the political agreement on this. And this governance regulation requires all member states to provide national integrated energy and climate plans by the end of this year. Those are the first drafts. And then by the end of next year, final draft plans. That may sound bureaucratic, boring, uninteresting. It's not. Why do we need those? First of all, it's extremely important for investors to be able to identify where are member states going, how are they going to develop their energy markets, what are their interests. You know, we have very diverse countries, some using nuclear, some more active in renewables, etc. the investors need to see what member states are doing. So that governance regulation is particularly important. And of course, it would be adopted and integrated into the EEA provisions in the future as well. It also helps to address the long-term greenhouse gas reduction strategy, methane reductions, etc. So it's particularly important also that stakeholders are to be consulted on this, and that there is regional consultation and regional cooperation in developing the plans. So again, this is something that is very much active now and being developed. It's also an area where the energy community countries, which are the 6 Western Balkan countries, plus Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, also will adopt the EU legislative framework in this respect. Not today, of course, but in the next few years. And they will also be adopting these plans, again with a view to reducing their emissions and improving the clean energy transition. So these are also aspects that are particularly important. Then in the electricity market design, we have 4 legislative acts which are under discussion and negotiation right now between the Parliament and the Council, and we expect that these also will be finalized by the end of the year. These are particularly important to ensure that the electricity market in Europe works even more efficiently throughout all of Europe, to make sure that renewables are better integrated, to make sure that consumers have even more of a role in demand response, in adjusting their consumption, in developing off-grid solutions, community-based developments, and of course digitalization in that context is really very important. We have a whole series also of projects of common interest for integration of the European energy market in gas, but also of course in electricity, in smart grids, in CCS as well. And those projects are even more emphasizing electricity interconnection and of course digitalization of those grids and integration of renewables. So that's another important aspect too that I wanted to mention. And under the Estonian presidency of the European Council, a declaration on improved digitalization of the energy market was agreed, which is another important element to show how the digitalization of the sector is really moving forward. So we hope that all these legislative acts will be completed by the end of this year. I'm quite confident that this will be the case and that they will come into effect relatively quickly. The regulations, of course, come into effect immediately. The directives take a bit more time because they have to be transposed into national law. But we think that these all will send a very strong signal about Europe's ambition and leadership when it comes time to putting in place a fully interconnected, sustainable and competitive energy system. Then only a few words about our long-term strategy on greenhouse gas emission reduction beyond 2030. This is sometimes called mid-century strategy. You know, I'm sure that the Paris Climate Agreement requires us by 2020 to establish a long-term strategy. And the Commission is working on a communication that does not just look at energy, although energy is a very important part of it. We are looking at a proposal that integrates energy, industry, transport, and agriculture to look at different options of how Europe could reach its Paris goals by 2050 and, of course, beyond. And this will take a huge effort, even more effort over the longer term, to make sure that all different parts of the economy continue to take their action. And of course, what we want to do, and it's of your interest too, we cannot stop our economic growth. We cannot stop the development of jobs. We want to make sure that the jobs and growth we have in the future is modern, sustainable, secure, safe, clean. And this transformation is going to take a lot of time, money, and courage to make sure that it really goes forward. So in that long-term strategy, which the Commission is proposing to adopt just before the Katowice COP24 meeting, we held a high-level consultative conference in July this year, and we had an open public consultation that ended on the 9th of October, and Norway has made a submission to that, for which we're very grateful. And we will also have a staff working document that goes into a bit more detail of how, where, and what the different options are in terms of encouraging further the circular economy and making sure that this long-term decarbonization strategy works, with an overview of introducing even more technological innovation and research, better circular economy incentives, and different combinations, including, of course, consumer participation and consumer behavior, which is an important element. So the idea is not to select one specific scenario, but to look at different options and common trends and challenges. So electrification will clearly play an important role in decarbonization, but we have to look also at other combinations. And the next Commission will decide whether new legislation might be useful to help further this process. So it's clear that the clean energy transition is going to play a central role in the fight against climate change. We're on track in Europe to meet our 2020 targets. Now we have to make sure that the 2030 targets are also met, and we have to work hard to, all together, including with you, to make progress in that respect. And of course, at global scale, people often say, but in Europe, you're only responsible for a small percentage of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. But as leaders of renewables, of innovation and technology, I think we can show by our good activities and good behavior that other parts of the world can also introduce these changes without stopping economic growth, without losing many, many jobs, and encourage these transformations and changes. So we are looking forward to working very much with you. We continue to rely very much on you as a strong and reliable partner. And now I'm going to say the only thing I can say in Norwegian, tusen takk, and let's continue. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I had, sorry, is it on? Yeah, perfect. I'd hope to have some question for you, but I think the time is up. But she will be here during the whole conference and also for the dinner tonight, so there will be opportunities to talk to you later.